Hello. So tonight we're just going to be painting more of that portrait I started the other day. So this is my vehicle for the self-portrait, for the self. And it is a makeup case that is beautiful. Right now I have this dark color, this kind of cool, green, blue, that I'm using just to see if I can find, there's this vein of darkness. So on one side I have the lights from the stream, then on the other side I have that like blue background light, and it's creating this like strip of warmth just straight down the middle. And I am really excited about that. So I'm gonna start with this like warm, cool color as a, as like kind of the divisive space. I might take that like all the way down the middle. What's nice is that even when I move, because I'm holding the mirror, it kind of will fluctuate between a standing, like it won't change as much, the difference between my standing perspective and my seated one, because I can just go back to the same spot. One thing I'm worried about going in with these kind of dark tones, these like more heavily contrasted colors, is that they will separate, or they'll end up making the color in the painting have this like harsh kind of orange blue. I'm hopefully going to get to a point where I can start lightening some of these shadows too. It would be more efficient if I hit a higher value right away, but sometimes you need to just feel the change, and the best way to do that is to make an exaggerated mark, or to make a like really bold decision. And it might not be efficient, but it'll get you to a feeling that you wouldn't have gotten before. See, this is where I'm starting to hop into that blue-orange relationship. A habit that happens when you start mixing these dark greens, where you start then alternating between red and blue, and eventually you end up straight in the middle, which is like right at that orange-yellow area. And that migration really, like, you can see it take over a painting. I like the vibrations. I like the movement between two colors on my eyes. You know, it feels good. I'm gonna start tapping into some of the warmth of my hair, which is like the darkest neutral color in my space. And that color actually does allow me to draw a little bit, like into my beard and this upper area. Though I think on this screen, I see it a lot more, so like, it's crazy having this tiny version. So I'm looking at this in OBS, and having a tiny version of my painting is actually really cool, because normally I have to like back up really far to get that. Now I'm moving over to this like green brown. It's like a really gross color. There. This is a super textured painting. This is maybe like 10 sessions in, and the more textured it gets, the more texture you need to apply. And that's how I draw when it gets to this level, is I just like put big globs of paint and then kind of drag my brush through them. Also, when you paint this way, you start to realize that there's no one way to get to any one mark. Like, I can make this, the theory is that eventually this can look a bunch of specks or pixels put together into space or representation of my face through this mirror that I'm using. And that's because of the accumulation of marks. This method allows for gesture to become prominent rather than, say, like drawing or rendering. But eventually you can start finding gesture that leads you back to life. That's what I'm excited for, getting there. Though it might take a while, and I might give up before then, so who knows? It's a process. Sometimes, because of other marks I've made, I'm forced to make new marks, or like marks that I was like, because it doesn't come out when I drag the brush through it, so it'll like interrupt and it'll create this new mark. And often I'm finding that just by like happenstance or like randomness, that mark is actually really helpful. It's like in the right direction because it's responding to an older mark. So it's like old past me is making decisions for new me. In the mirror, this section of my hairline is a lot thinner than this section, and I'm just trying to like kind of exaggerate that. So at this point in the painting also, everything is a bit of an exaggeration. So I need to like really emphasize visual things because it will get lost in all of the texture and mark. Yeah, I remember people, like I know painters who get really excited about like the physical qualities of their paint. And part of me is like put off by that. I'm like, oh, the paint doesn't matter to me. But then like the more I make these paintings, the more I'm like really excited about like just the thickness of this paint and like how I can push it around and do like create different textures with it. And it has different effects and it means different things. Sorry, when I put it next to that warm shoulder, it feels like a red, like a bright red. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's actually a mixture between all of these greens and browns. Another thing that the field does that's really helpful, so mixing in or painting into a field of color, is that it allows you to reorient the ground. So introducing this big orange space, it allowed me to say, I can't understand what's going on here, so let me put a flat plane of color over it, and that's like the white of a canvas or the brown of linen. And line takes on such a more meaningful role in the painting when you start having variations in size and shape of those planes or those like fields of color. I upped the value by mixing red into it. So, I mean, in this camera, it isn't that much lighter, but it's much lighter to me than like these colors, or these ones. It also allows for me to see gestural moments or like abstract moments that are more directly getting to the nature of this portrait than other moments might. There's so much paint on my palette. Oh no! There's so much paint on my sock. So I'm gonna use some of this color that I brought into the space back there to start building that warmth down the center of my face that I was talking about at the beginning. Sometimes there are these really small marks that I just get so excited about because they do something dynamic within such a confusing space. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to change form with a short, tiny, infinitesimal moment in such a confusing and cluttered space. But I think that's what excites me about these like maximalist paintings. This I might need to incorporate some of this white I have, and the white I have is actually radiant violet, not violent. It creates these really nice neutral, kind of like what you imagine gray to be. Something I'm noticing is as it gets more cluttered, my mark is becoming shorter. You would think with my logic of using more paint to create sharper lines and like more paint to create difference, that I would be using bigger strokes or switch to a bigger brush. But it seems the more I put on, the smaller my mark becomes, though I make more repetitive marks. So like these lines, it's kind of like cross-hatching across instead of like big gestural drawing moments. This color I just mixed unintentionally feels purple in this spot, but it's green, and I love when stuff like that happens. So when I do this, I just leave these colors on my palette like all the time, and it just grows. And then maybe like once a month I've been kind of cutting off everything with my palette knife. So this dark color that I'm about to mix needs to be in the like kind of right ballpark of value at least to be able to draw. So it needs to be darker than it really is. And it needs to be a different hue than everything else without separating so much that it loses itself. That creates a giant hole in my face, but I'm actually kind of okay with it. Oh, it's like really a hole up here, but that's... We'll just make another one on the other side, you know, for posterity. Hit a little higher value right there, and I think it'll do the trick. It's like just barely lighter than everything else, this paint that I just mixed. If I knock it up a little bit more, I think it'll make a difference in the end, even though you probably can't see it from where you are. But in this accumulation of mark, you're going to have a lot of depth. That just happens when you have like large bodies of little tiny dots and marks and things. If you think of like Hieronymus Bosch or Seurat or Andrew Forge, there's a lot of artists that have used this idea, or Murakami. There's a lot of people who use this idea of a like really saturated area of max bodies or visual entities. This maximal view is a part of creating space, like this like really hectic field of dots. And so I don't really think about space that much when I start deflating it, because I know it's gonna be there no matter what. I think I found that value I was talking about before. I found the change in space. So like these lines, this value, this one, let me line it up. That one is the right value for those dark marks in my eyes. And it's kind of like in this cluttered atmospheric mess of a painting, these will bring out that recessed form. Whereas maybe if I lose a little bit of it, so we're gonna lose this side of my face a little bit. But by losing that, we'll have more of an accurate sense of where the limit of the light is.